These are the top 5 longest-lasting wars in history. Some of these wars went on for so long that generations of people only knew life during conflict. And wait until you hear about number 1. It lasted so many centuries, it's almost unbelievable. Let's dive in, starting with number 5. At number 5, we have the Vietnam War, which lasted for 19 years, from 1955 to 1975. It began as a fight between North Vietnam, supported by communist allies like the Soviet Union and China, and South Vietnam, backed by the United States and other anti-communist countries. The world was deeply divided over this war, and it became one of the most controversial conflicts of the 20th century. Soldiers fought in dense jungles and faced tough conditions. But the war didn't just affect the battlefield. It disrupted millions of lives. Entire villages were destroyed, forcing families to flee and become refugees. One of the most iconic moments of the war was the fall of Saigon in 1975, when North Vietnamese forces captured the capital of South Vietnam, effectively ending the war. But the scars left behind are still felt today. Despite lasting 19 years, the Vietnam War is just the beginning of our list. What if I told you there was a war that lasted almost twice as long? You're not going to believe number 4. Moving on to number 4, the 30 Years' War, which lasted from 1618 to 1648. Imagine living through a war that went on for an entire generation. This conflict started in Europe as a religious war between Catholics and Protestants, but it quickly turned into a battle for power among the great European nations. Countries like France, Spain, and Sweden got involved, each fighting to expand their influence. The war brought devastation like Europe had never seen before. Armies burned entire villages to the ground, and millions of people didn't die from fighting, but from famine and disease. Germany was hit the hardest, with some areas losing half their population. By the time the war ended, the map of Europe had changed, and new rules were put in place to try to prevent wars like this from happening again. But if you think 30 years is a long time, you're in for a shock. Get ready for a war that lasted over a century. Next up is number 3, the 100 Years' War, a conflict that lasted 116 years, from 1337 to 1453. It was a fierce struggle between England and France over who had the right to rule France. Can you imagine being born, growing up, and dying, all while the same war was still happening? That's what life was like during the 100 Years' War. At first, England was winning, thanks to their powerful longbowmen, who could take down enemies from a great distance. But France wasn't ready to give up. They found hope in a young girl named Joan of Arc, who believed she was chosen by God to lead the French army to victory. Against all odds, Joan helped turn the tide of the war in France's favor. She was captured and executed. Her bravery inspired the French to keep fighting. By the time the war ended, France had reclaimed most of its land, and England's dream of ruling both countries was over. But what if I told you there's a war that lasted not just over a century, but 2 centuries? Let's move on to number 2. At number 2, we have the Byzantine-Ottoman Wars, a conflict that stretched on for 200 years, from the late 1200s to 1453. These wars were fought between the Byzantine Empire, which had once been one of the most powerful empires in the world, and the rising Ottoman Empire. The Byzantines were known for their incredible city of Constantinople, which was surrounded by massive walls that seemed impossible to break through. For centuries, the Ottomans tried to conquer the city, and though they won battles here and there, the Byzantines always managed to hold them off. That all changed in 1453, when the Ottoman leader Mehmed II, also known as Mehmed the Conqueror, launched one final attack. He used massive cannons to blast through Constantinople's walls, something no one had been able to do before. When the city finally fell, it marked the end of the Byzantine Empire and the beginning of a new era for the Ottomans. If you thought 200 years was long, wait until you hear about number 1. It's the longest war in history, and it might blow your mind. Finally, at number 1, we have the Reconquista, which lasted a staggering 781 years, from 711 to 1492. That's right, nearly 8 centuries. This war took place in what is now Spain and Portugal. It began when Muslim forces from North Africa, called the Moors, conquered most of the Iberian Peninsula. For centuries, Christian kingdoms in the north slowly fought to reclaim their land. The Reconquista wasn't a single continuous battle. There were long periods of peace and times when the fighting seemed to stop altogether. But whenever one side grew stronger, the war would flare up again. For hundreds of years, the Christian kingdoms began to push the Moors farther south. The final chapter came in 1492, when King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain captured the city of Granada, the last Muslim stronghold. That same year, they funded Christopher Columbus's journey to the Americas, marking the start of Spain's rise as a global superpower. And there you have it, the 5 longest wars in history. From decades to centuries, these wars shaped the world in ways that are still felt today. Which one surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more incredible history content.